How's it, everyone? Welcome to another string review right here on OpenCourt. So today we're taking a look at the newest string in the Solinco lineup. You guys have probably heard of it. It is the Solinco Confidential. Let's check it out. So this Confidential is the newest polyester string in the Solinco lineup. It was released a few years ago and it has exploded in popularity since then. This string was originally released as a prototype to touring pros, and Solinco never intended to release this to the general public, but it was so positively received that Solinco decided to release it on the open market under this prototype name, the Confidential. So as the name suggests, the formula to this string is a secret. So I don't know exactly what goes into this. All I know that it is a shaped string. Now, I don't know for sure if it's 4-sided or 5-sided. I think it's 4-sided, but every time I say this about strings like tubebuddy and Hyper-G, someone out there is like, no, it's 5-sided or whatever. So regardless, it is shaped, and I do believe that it is 4-sided, so it is meant to grip the ball to impart spin. The back of the package here says utilizes an innovative chemical composition in combination with the high-powered polyester monofilament fiber designed and shaped to generate maximum power control and spin amplification, as well as improved tension maintenance. I have used this string before, and I gotta say, this string does hold tension very well. So the Confidential comes in at about $12.99 for one set or $169.99 for a whole reel. And it comes in 4 gauges from 130, 125, 120, and 115 millimeters. So I am testing out the 120 millimeter gauge, and I got it strung up in my Head Graphene 360 Speed Pro. I strung it at my reference tension at 52 in the mains and 50 in the crosses. Now, I have used this string before back when it was first released, and to be honest, I didn't love it, but it's been a while since I used it, so I'm going to test it out again and see if my opinion has changed. So let's get into the playtest of the Solinco Confidential. So let's start out with the pros of the Solinco Confidential string. This string's best aspect is, I'm sure, the reason why it's so popular, the control. This is one of the most predictable strings that I've ever used from the baseline. Sure, the response is pretty stiff and dead, but I can take massive swings from the baseline and the ball lands pretty much in the general area of where I'm aiming. The Confidential will allow advanced players who can provide the power to swing out without much worry that the ball will fly long. This awesome control most likely comes from the combination of string bed stiffness and spin generation from the sharp edges. When I strike the ball cleanly in the sweet spot, I feel the ball sinking into the string bed and launching off with a decent amount of force. The string stiffness absorbs just enough kinetic energy, resulting in good control, but the shot still retains enough energy to have some force behind it. For a relatively stiff string, the Confidential has a decent amount of dwell time. I really enjoyed the Confidential on my forehand ground strokes and returns. This is my most aggressive swing, which I'm sure is also the case for a lot of people. With a string that is springy, I have a hard time corralling the launch from my forehand, but I didn't have much issue at all with the Confidential. In fact, this string encourages you to swing out. Anything less than a full swing felt like I would dump the ball into the bottom of the net. My forehand returns were probably my favorite shot because I like to step in, shorten my backswing, and attack the return, and I felt the Confidential complements that type of swing well. Surprisingly, I also got a decent amount of punch on my backhand ground strokes too. Like I said, this string does a good job of providing predictable control, but also retaining some power. I didn't feel my backhand lost much power as long as I hit it cleanly in the sweet spot. I didn't play any singles with this string this time around, but I can see advanced singles players being able to push their opponents left and right easily with this string. The good control also translated to my service game. I'm not exaggerating when I say I had absolute pinpoint control on my serves. All of my serves went exactly where I was aiming, and they bounced in the direction I was trying to get them to bounce. I recently changed my service form a bit, and that resulted in my flat serve going in at a higher percentage. With the Confidential, it felt like I got an even bigger boost in flat serve efficiency. I didn't count exactly, but I felt like 3 out of 4 flat serves were going in. That made holding serves so much easier than it usually is. Slice serves were probably the weakest of my 3 serves. I couldn't get the racket around the side of the ball enough to hit wide slices on the deuce side. This isn't so much the string's fault, but I noticed that with other strings that slide and displace a little better, I get more skidding slice serves that slide away from my opponent's forehand. This wasn't too much of an issue though, because I got decent pace on the slice serve, so I just sliced it into the body more often. Besides the control, the other aspect of the Solinco Confidential many players love is the spin potential. Spin and control usually go hand in hand because the spin brings hard shots down inside the court, resulting in control of those shots. So let's start with the serves. Kick serves had a sharp dive and high bounce. Even in my Speed Pro's 1820 pattern, I got decent topspin on my kick serves. After the flat serve, my kick serve was my second favorite serve, and I used it to approach the net, which is where I like to play. The string really grips the ball and pulls it down inside the lines. With my ground strokes, I saw my shots diving inside the lines at the last second. When I was hitting inside-out cross-court forehands, I was able to fully utilize the length of the court and pound away without hesitation. I'm actually curious to see how this string plays in a more open pattern with better spin potential, like the Head Extreme Tour or the Babla Pure Arrow. The spin can add some much needed control to those powerful frames, so if you have an open pattern racket, this Confidential could be worth trying. So the spin and control were fantastic, but the other great aspect of the Confidential string is the tension maintenance. This also goes hand in hand with that predictable response. Once the string settles into the racket, the response stayed steady for multiple play sessions without much drop in tension. The longer a string remains playable, the more predictable your shots will be. Tension maintenance isn't a huge issue for me because I usually cut strings out before they drop severely anyway, but the durability with the Confidential isn't the greatest in my opinion because the sharp edges saw into each other, so the Confidential is a string that will maintain its tension until it snaps. So let's get into the cons of the Solinco Confidential. The biggest issue I have with this string is that it is pretty dead. The response is stiff and boardy, especially at the start. The Confidential has an initial break-in period, which is common with stiffer polys, but boy is this one rough. This string is super boardy and stiff at the beginning. Anything hit outside the sweet spot had no power at all, and although it doesn't bother my elbow, anyone with even mild arm problems will feel the pain with the Confidential's break-in. This bothered me on my returns at the beginning. Since I'm returning what is supposed to be my opponent's hardest shot, I don't always strike the ball cleanly. Usually the string will give me a little help if it has some elasticity, but the Confidential gives me no help at all on off-center shots. I dumped a lot of returns into the net at the beginning of this playtest. The few times I got the ball to clear the net, the opposing net player was right there to put it away. I think the best range and tension of the Confidential is somewhere between 45 and 50 pounds. Only advanced ball strikers who can hit cleanly and generate good power through sound mechanics should string this above 50 pounds. I'm sorry to say, but anyone who cannot generate their own power has no business stringing this above 50. Next con, and this is the reason I like Tour Bite better, is the feel. The Confidential feels deader than the Tour Bite. Even Hyper-G's feel has slightly more response. I just like the Confidential a bit more overall because Hyper-G feels mushy once the strings break in, but my game is predominantly built around touch, feel, and finesse. With the Confidential, I just don't get the response that allows me to utilize my finesse shots like drop shots, lobs, short angles, and volleys. My net game really suffered with this string. I hit so many volleys into the net because the string bed is so dead that I get no push unless I really swing out. Also, placing my volleys became difficult when I was engaged in a high-speed rally. Feel and response on strings not only affect touch shots, but also placement volleys. A string's response gives me the necessary feedback to hit the volleys exactly where I'm aiming. I just didn't have the confidence I usually have at net, and the fact I put this string in my baseline-oriented Speed Pro only exacerbated that issue. And lastly, objectively, Solinco Confidential is a pretty stiff string. In terms of stiffness, I think the Confidential lies between Tour Bite and Hyper-G, but leans more towards Tour Bite. The stiffness is actually comparable to Solinco Revolution, which is a string I love, but the Confidential is very stiff when freshly strung. Even after it settles in, it still feels on the stiffer side, so people with arm problems might want to stay away. So let's answer the question I like to ask at the end of all my reviews: who is the Solinco Confidential for? It's definitely for advanced ground strokers who like to take aggressive swings from the baseline and play what I like to call bully tennis, which is just you bullying the opponent around the court. Confidential will give you the control to be the big bully. I don't think serve and volleyers or players with slower swing speeds will benefit much from this string, and players with arm problems should stay far away. So to sum it up, I've said it before, but the Confidential is not quite the string for my game. I like Terabyte and Revolution more, but I think I like Confidential more than Hyper-G. But I do see why this has become such a popular string in such a short time. Maybe if I strung it at a lower tension, I might have been able to get a little more feel and power, but regardless, this string is meant for baseline grinders, which I am not. So the Confidential, let me know what you guys think and where this string ranks on your list of Solinco polys. Thank you for watching this review of the Solinco Confidential string right here on OpenCourt. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you on an OpenCourt.